Anyway, it has been quite a day. We are going to get into all of it, but I will see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Okay, there is so much to talk about tonight, but let me start with this. You probably remember that just last month, journalist Sarah Fitzpatrick at The Atlantic published a blockbuster story based on interviews with more than 24 sources, including current and former FBI officials. The report alleged that FBI Director Kash Patel's drinking had become a recurring source of concern throughout the government. Sources told Sarah Fitzpatrick that Kash Patel was known to drink to the point of obvious intoxication. They also claimed that morning meetings sometimes had to be rescheduled for later in the day because of his alcohol-fueled nights. Multiple sources even told Sarah Fitzpatrick that, at one point, security officials requested breaching equipment, the kind of tools SWAT teams use to break down doors, because Kash Patel had allegedly become unreachable behind locked doors. When The Atlantic prepared to publish the story, Kash Patel reportedly dared them to print it, insisting the allegations were false and warning that he would see them in court. Now, Kash Patel has followed through on that threat, and he did so very quickly. He filed a defamation lawsuit against The Atlantic demanding $250 million in damages. That was where the story stood as of last night. Then this morning, Ken Dilanian and Carol Lutnick broke the news that the FBI had allegedly launched a criminal leak investigation focused on Sarah Fitzpatrick and her reporting on Kash Patel for The Atlantic. According to the report, two sources familiar with the matter confirmed the existence of the investigation. However, the FBI denied it entirely. A bureau spokesperson stated that the story was completely false, insisting that no such investigation existed and that Sarah Fitzpatrick was not under investigation at all. Okay, we will see. That was this morning. Then, tonight, despite already being sued by Kash Patel, and despite the possibility of being criminally investigated by his FBI, Sarah Fitzpatrick published yet another explosive story about, yes, Kash Patel. In this latest report, 8 people familiar with the matter, including current and former FBI officials, told Sarah Fitzpatrick that it was not unusual for Kash Patel to travel with a personalized supply of branded bourbon. The 750 milliliters bottle he reportedly travels with is engraved with Kash Patel's name and title, FBI Director, along with the FBI shield symbol. And beneath the shield, his name reportedly appears again, this time stylized with a $sign replacing the S. Stay classy, Kash Patel. According to the report, Kash Patel also signed some of the bottles, adding his signature and the number 9, presumably because he is the 9th person to hold the title of FBI Director. That detail suggests he spent quite a bit of time developing this personal merchandise project. Sarah Fitzpatrick further reported that Kash Patel distributed these self-branded bourbon bottles to staff and civilians while conducting official business, including during at least one FBI event. The report also alleged that Justice Department aircraft had been used to transport cases of the bourbon merchandise. When The Atlantic reached out for comment, the FBI did not deny that the bottles existed. Instead, a spokesperson stated that Kash Patel followed all applicable ethical guidelines, paid for any personal gifts himself, and claimed that gifting such bottles was part of an FBI tradition dating back more than a decade. But when Sarah Fitzpatrick attempted to verify that claim, the explanation reportedly fell apart. The FBI declined to provide photographs of similar bottles connected to past directors, possibly because none existed. And when a former senior FBI official was asked whether he had ever seen personally branded liquor bottles distributed by previous FBI directors, he reportedly burst out laughing. The bigger issue here is not simply the allegation that Kash Patel drinks heavily. At this point, many people feel they have already seen public examples of his drinking behavior for themselves. The larger story is that Kash Patel allegedly drinks while leading an organization that has historically maintained a strict zero-tolerance culture regarding alcohol use on the job, and even alcohol abuse off-duty, because the FBI is the nation's chief law enforcement agency. As one former FBI agent told Sarah Fitzpatrick, the bottles are demoralizing because they suggest one set of standards for the FBI director and another for the rest of the bureau. Meanwhile, the attorney for former FBI Washington Field Office Assistant Director Stephen Jensen told Sarah Fitzpatrick, "There are line agents out there spending their nights and weekends trying to finish warrants, write reports, and plan arrests. Yet the FBI director apparently has time to design logos, attend hockey games, and sit for multi-hour podcast interviews. This is one of the most serious jobs in the country, not a vehicle for self-promotion and branding. That was very well said. When Sarah Fitzpatrick published her first major scoop on Kash Patel last month, one of the most remarkable aspects of the story was the sheer number of sources involved, more than 24. I spoke with her the very night the article was released, and she told me that even more people from inside the bureau were already reaching out to her, trying to share additional information about Kash Patel, and they were not doing so lightly. These are not the kinds of people who are typically willing to speak out against the FBI, especially right now because Kash Patel is reportedly pursuing polygraph investigations in a way that many say has never happened before at the bureau. So, for the concern to reach this level, these sources appear genuinely worried that the country could be put at risk because of this conduct. And, as the reporter explained, she felt a serious responsibility to handle that reporting with extreme care. The journalist said those individuals spoke out because they feared for the safety of the country with Kash Patel in charge of protecting it. That guy right there. And now, even with the threat of a potential criminal investigation into leakers and a massive defamation lawsuit, more people have reportedly come forward to say they do not believe Kash Patel's behavior is appropriate for someone in his position. Now, I want you to keep that story in your mind. Think about how aggressively the FBI appears to be working to identify leakers who are speaking negatively about Kash Patel's personal conduct. Then compare that situation to this breaking news. A highly influential Democrat from Virginia, State Senator Louise Lucas, is now reportedly at the center of a major FBI corruption investigation. Agents are said to be executing search warrants across the Commonwealth, including at her office. Alex Hogan was reporting live from Portsmouth, Virginia, this morning, when the FBI raided the office of the prominent Democratic state official. Fox News was already on the scene. Camera crews were positioned and ready as SWAT teams and FBI vehicles carried out raids targeting Louise Lucas' office and nearby businesses. That is particularly notable because Portsmouth, Virginia, as shown on the map, is roughly a 3-hour drive from Fox's Washington, D.C. office, nearly 200 miles away. Now, maybe Fox News simply got lucky. Maybe they happened to have a reporter and a camera crew conveniently nearby when the raid began. But many observers believe it is far more plausible that someone within the FBI leaked details of the raid ahead of time. Now, Louise Lucas is a major figure in Virginia politics. She serves as president pro tempore of the Virginia State Senate and is nationally known for leading efforts earlier this year to redraw the state's congressional maps, a move that could potentially help Democrats gain 4 additional seats in the midterm elections and offset Republican gerrymandering efforts elsewhere. According to reports, the raid was connected to an investigation that began during the Biden administration involving possible corruption and bribery allegations. Beyond that, however, the Department of Justice has released very little information publicly. As of now, there are still no confirmed details explaining the exact reason for the raid or the specific accusations against Louise Lucas. So, is it possible there was actual wrongdoing? Sure, it is possible, but context matters. A source familiar with the matter reportedly told Carol Lutnick that Donald Trump's former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia believed pursuing a bribery case against Louise Lucas could politically benefit the White House ahead of the midterm elections, even though some prosecutors reportedly questioned the strength of the case itself. Sound familiar? As Virginia Attorney General Jay Jones said today, "We simply do not have sufficient information about the reported FBI activity in Portsmouth." However, several previous actions of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia have undermined public confidence in that office. I urge everyone to exercise restraint and judgment until the relevant facts are known. There are a lot of stories unfolding right now, but keep this one in your mind. Think about how the FBI raided the office of a prominent Democratic lawmaker shortly after she took actions that Donald Trump reportedly opposed, and how Fox News just happened to be there to capture the footage. Now, compare that to this. Yesterday, we learned that the Department of Justice had agreed to return or destroy evidence seized from MAGA Republican Congressman Andy Ogles. If the name Andy Ogles does not sound familiar, it may be because former Congressman George Santos overshadowed him for a while. At one point, the two almost seemed to be competing for the title of the most prolific liar in Congress. According to local Tennessee reports, Andy Ogles once claimed to be an economist, though it later emerged that he had only taken a single community college economics course and barely passed it. He also claimed to have served for years on the board of directors of a city that, in reality, did not even have a board of directors. I could keep going, but you get the idea. Back in 2024, the FBI seized Andy Ogles' phone as part of an investigation. Among the allegations being examined were serious questions about his public claims and financial conduct. Andy Ogles also appeared to have lied about campaign contributions, a very serious allegation. He claimed that he had donated $320,000 to his own campaign back in 2022. However, financial disclosures later suggested that the congressman appeared to be nearly broke, reportedly without even a checking or savings account in his name. Later, Andy Ogles admitted that he had not actually donated the $320,000 to his campaign, though he never fully explained why he had allegedly made the claim in the first place. Campaign finance violations are extremely serious matters, involving numerous federal laws. As a result, the FBI seized Andy Ogles' phone at the end of 2024 as part of its investigation. But then something changed. When Donald Trump returned to office last year, the direction of the investigation reportedly shifted almost immediately. Just 11 days into the new administration, the career prosecutors handling the case withdrew from it, and responsibility for the investigation was transferred to Main Justice in Washington, D.C. At the same time, Andy Ogles seemed determined to compete for another unofficial title, biggest political loyalist to Donald Trump. He introduced legislation aimed at giving Donald Trump authority to purchase Greenland. He nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And perhaps most remarkably, Andy Ogles proposed a constitutional amendment that would allow Donald Trump to serve a third presidential term. The wording of the amendment was especially notable because it would only permit a third term for presidents who had not served 2 consecutive terms, meaning it would apply to Donald Trump, but not to Barack Obama. And now, after all of that political loyalty and public praise, the investigation into Andy Ogles' alleged campaign finance misconduct appears to be quietly fading away. Individually, each of these stories would already raise serious concerns about what is happening inside the Department of Justice. But taken together, critics argue they amount to a flashing warning sign. And when placed in the broader context of the past year, the pattern appears even more alarming to many observers. The Justice Department has reportedly investigated, targeted, or publicly scrutinized a growing list of individuals perceived as political opponents of Donald Trump. The list has become so extensive that it is difficult to keep track. Among the names mentioned are former FBI Director James Comey, former CIA Director John Brennan, New York Attorney General Letitia James, Senator Mark Kelly, Senator Alyssa Slotkin, Congressman Jason Crow, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, Senator Adam Schiff, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and many others. To critics, the pattern appears increasingly clear. They believe Donald Trump is using the Justice Department to reward allies while targeting perceived political enemies. Last night, former President Barack Obama issued a sharp warning about exactly this issue during an interview with Stephen Colbert. Barack Obama said, "We can survive a lot, bad policy, funky elections, there is a lot we can overcome. But we cannot overcome the politicization of the criminal justice system. You cannot have a situation where whoever is in charge of the government starts using that power to go after political enemies or reward friends." Tonight, 2 people were brought in to help make sense of all this news: Andrew Weissman, former general counsel of the FBI, and Tim Weiner, the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter known for his extensive reporting on the Bureau's history and inner workings. Tim Weiner is also the author of Enemies, A History of the FBI, and his latest book, The Mission, The CIA in the 21st Century. The discussion then turned back to Kash Patel. The host pointed out that the FBI was reportedly investigating the Atlantic journalist Sarah Fitzpatrick at the very same time that Kash Patel was personally suing the publication for $250 million. Despite all of that pressure, Sarah Fitzpatrick continued reporting aggressively on Kash Patel, something the host described as a sign of both courage and commitment to journalism. The question posed to Andrew Weissman was simple. How could this not represent a massive conflict of interest? Andrew Weissman responded bluntly, saying it absolutely was a massive conflict. He argued that you cannot have an FBI director simultaneously pursuing a civil lawsuit while the Bureau is allegedly involved in a criminal investigation connected to the same reporting. He also questioned whether there was any legitimate basis for a criminal investigation at all. According to Andrew Weissman, even if FBI employees had leaked information to a reporter, it would not necessarily constitute a crime because the information being discussed was not classified. He emphasized that receiving non-classified information from government employees is not illegal for journalists, nor is sharing such information automatically criminal. In his view, the situation represented not only a profound conflict of interest, but potentially an abuse of power as well. Andrew Weissman continued by saying that when he thinks about the broader lesson here, his mind goes back to the Supreme Court of the United States. He argued that the court's ruling on presidential immunity effectively established that there could be criminal immunity for launching sham investigations. He noted that the Supreme Court removed portions of Jack Smith's criminal grand jury indictment on those grounds. According to Andrew Weissman, that decision sent a dangerous message. Abusive criminal investigations may no longer carry meaningful criminal consequences. In his view, the ruling effectively unleashed the kind of behavior now being witnessed, where political figures and officials acting on behalf of the president feel increasingly confident that they will never face criminal liability.
Why?
Because, as he put it, not only does the Supreme Court appear to provide protection, but the president also has the power to pardon those carrying out questionable actions on his behalf. I think we're in an incredibly dangerous situation, Andrew Weissman said, given the current state of the law. The host then stepped in, saying he wanted to pause and level set for viewers because people can sometimes become numb to the constant stream of political controversies dominating the news cycle. He turned to Tim Weiner, noting that former FBI directors have certainly misused Bureau resources for political purposes before. However, in this case, he argued that Kash Patel's motivations appeared intensely personal. The allegations were not about classified FBI operations or national security matters. They were about his personal behavior. The host asked Tim Weiner, who has spent decades studying the FBI's history, how these events compare to past abuses of power inside the Bureau. Tim Weiner responded by invoking one of the most controversial figures in FBI history, J. Edgar Hoover, who led the Bureau for 48 years. According to Tim Weiner, Hoover operated under one strict rule for his agents: don't embarrass the Bureau. Then came the sharp line that instantly captured attention. Kash Patel embarrasses the Bureau with every whiskey-scented breath he takes. Tim Weiner went on to argue that beyond what he described as politically motivated investigations into Donald Trump's enemies, such as James Comey, and beyond what he called harassment of the press, Kash Patel had fundamentally transformed the FBI through what he described as an ideological purge. According to Tim Weiner, senior leaders within the Bureau's national security and intelligence divisions had been removed. He also claimed that agents involved in investigations connected to Donald Trump, including inquiries into classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, the January 6th attack, and alleged Russian connections during the 2016 election, had been systematically pushed aside. He argued that similar ideological purges were also taking place across the CIA, the Department of Justice, the State Department, and even the Pentagon. Then Tim Weiner made an especially provocative comparison. He clarified that he was not directly equating governments, but referenced Pol Pot's Cambodia, where people were purged for wearing glasses because it suggested they could read and think independently. In Donald Trump's America, Tim Weiner argued, people were being purged because they can see things clearly. The host then took a moment to thank the men and women still serving inside the FBI and across government institutions before shifting the conversation back to the Bureau's internal culture. He pointed out that the latest allegations surrounding Kash Patel almost felt like self-parody, an FBI director accused of excessive drinking while branding bourbon bottles with his own name and title. While acknowledging that those allegations might not be the most serious accusations facing Kash Patel, the host asked how that kind of behavior would be perceived inside the traditionally conservative FBI culture. Tim Weiner explained that the FBI has historically been an extremely buttoned-down institution, overwhelmingly white, male, conservative, and highly disciplined in its culture. He contrasted that with what he described as a QAnon-adjacent right-wing podcaster suddenly taking control of the bureau, traveling on FBI aircraft to events like the Olympics or wrestling matches in Las Vegas, and purging officials because Donald Trump disliked investigations targeting him. According to Tim Weiner, the atmosphere inside federal law enforcement agencies had shifted from discomfort to outright fear. He argued that the term chilling effect was far too weak to describe what many professionals inside the system were now experiencing. He described Kash Patel as unstable and unreliable, then referenced Sarah Fitzpatrick's reporting alleging that the FBI director was sometimes too intoxicated to wake up in the morning. And then he raised what he described as the truly terrifying question. What happens if a major national crisis strikes the United States? What if the country suddenly faces war or a catastrophic intelligence emergency? Would Kash Patel be capable of responding effectively? That, Tim Weiner concluded, is a real question. Part of the reporting alleges that Kash Patel was drinking so heavily that he could not even be awakened. The host then turned back to Andrew Weissman, noting that he has consistently helped explain the extraordinary political and legal moment the country is currently experiencing. The host said one lesson many people seem to be learning is that it is important to fight back instead of simply allowing the administration to intimidate critics into silence, while also acknowledging that doing so requires tremendous courage. He then asked what legal advice Andrew Weissman would give to The Atlantic and reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick, especially considering that Kash Patel's lawsuit could potentially expose even more embarrassing details through the legal process. Andrew Weissman responded that the safest legal move for The Atlantic would likely be filing a motion to dismiss the case outright. He explained that defamation lawsuits are notoriously difficult for public figures to win and emphasized one fundamental principle of journalism law: truth is a complete defense. However, he also suggested another, far more aggressive strategy. According to Andrew Weissman, if The Atlantic truly possesses strong evidence, and he argued it certainly appears they do, given that they doubled down with multiple stories supported by numerous sources, then the publication could choose to call Kash Patel's bluff and push the case all the way to trial. You say we don't have the evidence? You say this reporting is false? Fine, he suggested. Let's go to trial. That strategy would potentially force Kash Patel to sit for a deposition and testify under oath in a civil proceeding. As Andrew Weissman pointed out, civil lawsuits allow attorneys to compel testimony and question parties directly under oath about the truthfulness of the allegations involved. From a journalist's perspective, he argued, such a move could ultimately strengthen confidence in the reporting while further damaging Kash Patel's credibility if the evidence holds up. Before wrapping up, Andrew Weissman added one more observation based on his experience working under former FBI Director Robert Mueller. He said the idea of an FBI director publicly branding merchandise, distributing liquor bottles, or promoting himself personally would have been completely unthinkable under previous bureau leadership. According to Andrew Weissman, Robert Mueller was so disciplined that staff would routinely remove the word "I" from his speeches because he refused to make himself the focus of attention. He said that same ethos also existed under former FBI directors Louis Freeh and Christopher Wray. Even if people disagreed with those directors politically or criticized how they ran the bureau, Andrew Weissman argued that they still maintained a sense of institutional seriousness and humility. By contrast, he described the idea of an FBI director distributing liquor and selling self-branded merchandise as deplorable. The segment then shifted toward what may come next politically. The host teased an upcoming interview with Congressman Jamie Raskin, who has already demanded investigations into the allegations surrounding Kash Patel. The host noted that Jamie Raskin had previously sent a formal letter to Kash Patel raising concerns about reports of erratic behavior and alleged alcohol abuse, including a request that the FBI director undergo alcohol use screening. The host also pointed out that if Democrats eventually regain control of the House of Representatives, Jamie Raskin's questions could quickly escalate into subpoenas, hearings, and full congressional investigations. Moments later, Congressman Jamie Raskin, the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, joined the program. The host reminded viewers that Jamie Raskin had already written to Kash Patel following the original reporting by The Atlantic back in April. Now, after this new reporting about personalized bourbon bottles, the host asked what additional questions he had about what was happening under Kash Patel's leadership of the FBI. Jamie Raskin responded by saying the reports coming out of the Bureau described an atmosphere of chaos, absentee leadership, and allegations of drinking during the workday. According to Jamie Raskin, the administration's response has not been to seriously address the underlying allegations. Instead, he argued, officials have focused on targeting reporters, searching for damaging information about journalists, combing through FBI databases, and cracking down on alleged leakers. But how about addressing the actual underlying problem? Jamie Raskin asked. He pointed out that the original report from The Atlantic relied on roughly 20 separate sources, making it increasingly difficult, in his view, to dismiss the allegations as fabricated or politically motivated. Jamie Raskin said that it seemed increasingly implausible to suggest all of the allegations had simply been fabricated. He argued that if Kash Patel truly believed he had nothing to hide, especially if he was willing to sue The Atlantic, then he should also be willing to complete the same type of alcohol use questionnaire commonly used for both public sector and private sector employees to determine whether drinking is interfering with job performance. And because, in Jamie Raskin's view, no one else inside the Trump administration appears willing to seriously address the issue, he argued that Congress must step in and exercise its oversight authority. The host then pointed out that numerous sources had already spoken not only with journalists like Sarah Fitzpatrick, but also with congressional Democrats behind the scenes. That led to an important question: what protections actually exist for whistleblowers? The host asked what someone working inside the FBI, the Justice Department, or another federal agency should do if they possess information and want to speak with Congress, especially if they do not have a lawyer or legal guidance. Jamie Raskin explained that the House Judiciary Committee, like other congressional committees, can be contacted directly by citizens and government employees. People can call, write letters, or send emails to provide information regarding misconduct or potential criminal activity occurring anywhere inside the federal government. He emphasized that the Whistleblower Protection Act exists specifically to protect individuals from retaliation when they report misconduct, whether civil or criminal, inside government agencies. According to Jamie Raskin, people have both rights and responsibilities under the law, but he acknowledged that deciding to come forward is an extremely serious and often frightening decision. That is why, he explained, congressional offices attempt to operate with complete confidentiality and full respect for the circumstances of anyone providing information. He also clarified that whistleblowers who speak directly to the press may face a somewhat different legal situation than those who work through official congressional oversight channels. Still, Jamie Raskin stressed that there should never be retaliation simply because someone tells the truth about misconduct inside the government. In his words, punishing people for speaking honestly about government wrongdoing would violate the First Amendment of the Constitution. Rather than pursuing what he described as hopeless and fruitless cover-ups, Jamie Raskin argued that Kash Patel and the administration should focus on addressing the actual underlying issues being raised. And, according to him, that principle applies broadly across every agency and department where allegations of corruption are emerging. As the interview wrapped up, the host jokingly told Jamie Raskin that he hoped he was still finding time to rest, go hiking, and take care of himself, because if Democrats regain control of the House of Representatives, he is likely to have an enormous workload ahead of him. After thanking Jamie Raskin for joining the program, the show pivoted to yet another major political controversy. The host teased an upcoming segment involving Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who had reportedly just completed a closed-door congressional interview concerning his connections to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and visits to Epstein's private island. According to Democrats who attended the interview, the meeting reportedly went very badly for Howard Lutnick. One Democratic lawmaker even joked that if Donald Trump ever saw the full video transcript of the deposition, he would immediately fire Howard Lutnick because the interview was that embarrassing. For months, Howard Lutnick has struggled to answer questions about whether he misled the public regarding the nature and extent of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The controversy stems from a public interview Howard Lutnick gave last year in which he claimed that after meeting Epstein in 2005, he and his wife decided they would never again associate with him socially, professionally, or philanthropically. In that interview, Howard Lutnick stated, "My wife and I decided I would never be in the room with that disgusting person ever again. If he was there, I wasn't going." But according to documents from the Epstein files, that statement later proved inaccurate. Records reportedly show that in 2012, years after Epstein's first arrest and conviction, Howard Lutnick traveled with his family and several nannies to visit Epstein's private island. A year later, in 2013, Epstein's accountant allegedly emailed Howard Lutnick regarding the resume of a woman described as a nanny, attempting to arrange a meeting with Epstein. Also in 2013, Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein reportedly became business partners in a joint investment venture. In 2015, Howard Lutnick invited Epstein to a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. Then, in 2017, Epstein reportedly donated $50,000 to a dinner honoring Howard Lutnick. Documents also indicate that as late as 2018, the two men were still communicating about various matters, including the investment venture they had both backed. One particularly curious detail involved a stock purchase agreement included in the Epstein files. The document reportedly contained signatures from both Epstein and Howard Lutnick. However, while the Justice Department left Epstein's address visible in the release materials, Howard Lutnick's address was redacted. Critics argue that this selective redaction may violate the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Others simply pointed out the absurdity of trying to hide an address that was already publicly known. As one old interview clip reminded viewers, Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein were once neighbors on East 71st Street in Manhattan, living just doors apart for nearly a decade. The host closed the segment by noting that Howard Lutnick denies any wrongdoing connected to Epstein and that inclusion in the Epstein files alone does not imply criminal guilt. Howard Lutnick has definitely been accused of misleading the public about the extent of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. During today's closed-door congressional interview, he reportedly admitted that he had, in fact, spent time with Epstein on numerous occasions. Yet he apparently continued insisting that this did not make him dishonest. One Democratic lawmaker described the performance as a complete assault on the English language. According to that account, Howard Lutnick attempted to redefine his previous statements by claiming that what he really meant was that he would never be alone with Epstein, while apparently being perfectly comfortable with his wife and children being around him. Critics argued that explanation made little sense. So, according to his revised version of events, he was comfortable allowing his family to spend time around a known predator, but personally insisted he would never be alone with him. The contradictions did not stop there. Howard Lutnick also reportedly told the committee that Jeffrey Epstein was not involved in blackmail operations, a statement that directly contradicted comments Lutnick himself had made publicly in the past. In one earlier appearance, Howard Lutnick described Epstein this way: "This guy was the greatest blackmailer ever. Blackmailing people. That's how he had money. There's a tape for everything." The contrast was striking. According to critics, Howard Lutnick seemed perfectly comfortable making dramatic accusations about Epstein while appearing on conservative podcasts and media programs. But once he found himself under questioning before Congress, where he could be held accountable for his words, his answers suddenly became far more cautious and evasive. In many ways, commentators argued, Howard Lutnick has become the perfect symbol of Donald Trump's broader Epstein problem. One day he is publicly denouncing Epstein as disgusting and dangerous, and the next day he is dodging questions about his own long-standing relationship with him while hoping the controversy fades away. But critics say that is not going to happen. The show then pivoted toward Democratic politics and the party's growing momentum in elections across the country. The host noted that since Donald Trump returned to office, Democrats have consistently overperformed expectations in races nationwide. More importantly, those successful Democrats have not all looked or sounded the same. Different kinds of Democratic candidates have been winning for different reasons, raising broader questions about what direction the party's future leadership should take. That discussion led directly into comments made by former President Barack Obama during a recent interview with Stephen Colbert. Barack Obama said he was not especially concerned about the so-called ideological divide between liberals and the left inside the Democratic Party. In his view, most Democrats, along with many independents and even some Republicans, still broadly share values centered on fairness and equality. Instead, Barack Obama argued that Democrats should focus on something much simpler, speaking to ordinary people in plain English rather than sounding like participants in an academic seminar. "Can you talk plain English to folks?" he asked. "Can you speak directly?" The host responded that he completely agreed. He then introduced Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, who is currently running for the U.S. Senate and whom the host described as an example of a Democrat succeeding precisely because she speaks directly and plainly to voters. A campaign ad from Juliana Stratton aired during the segment, featuring her declaring, "I'm not scared of a wannabe dictator. I'm running for Senate to stand up to Donald Trump." The ad emphasized her willingness to confront Donald Trump aggressively and promised accountability for what she described as his misconduct. After welcoming Juliana Stratton to the program, the host pointed to a recent Democratic overperformance in Michigan, where a Democrat won a special election by 19 points in a district that Kamala Harris had carried by only 1 point. He asked Juliana Stratton for her perspective on why Democrats continue outperforming expectations and how they can maintain that momentum heading into November. Juliana Stratton responded that successful Democrats are focusing on what voters genuinely care about rather than trying to dictate priorities to them. According to her, Democrats need to spend more time listening carefully to people and then reflecting those concerns back honestly instead of relying on talking points. She said voters want leaders who understand the struggles affecting everyday life and who are willing to fight for them in Washington. In her own campaign, she explained that message resonated strongly with voters because many people feel exhausted and frustrated by the sense that no matter who occupies the White House, their own lives are not improving. According to Juliana Stratton, voters repeatedly told her they wanted someone who would go to Washington and actually fight on their behalf without forgetting where they came from. The host then noted that Juliana Stratton had been nodding along while watching the clip of Barack Obama discussing the need for Democrats to communicate more plainly. He asked which issues she believed Democrats most needed to explain in clearer, more relatable language. Juliana Stratton answered by pointing to affordability and healthcare costs. She argued that politicians often use abstract language instead of describing what these issues actually look like in people's everyday lives. To illustrate the point, she shared a personal story about her daughter, an independent contractor who receives health care through the Affordable Care Act. According to Juliana Stratton, her daughter recently called her upset because her health insurance premiums had risen dramatically going into 2026. As a result, she felt forced to choose the cheapest possible coverage with the lowest level of benefits. "I don't want that for anyone," Juliana Stratton said. She argued that Democrats need to speak more directly about those real-life struggles affecting ordinary Americans. People, she said, are increasingly frustrated watching the ultra-wealthy continue getting richer, while everyday working Americans fall further behind economically. Juliana Stratton continued by saying that too many everyday Americans feel as though they are being left behind economically.